When one writes an academic paper, the acknowledgements come in the end. When one gives a talk, on the other hand, the acknowledgements usually appear at the beginning. So, usually one would start with a sentence like, I would like to thank so and so for inviting me to give this talk at this place. So, don't be surprised if this kind of the traditional acknowledgement is missing from this talk, because this is a talk which I haven't given in this form anywhere. I just used some slides which I have used for giving talks at different places on this topic, modified them, and then made an audio recording sitting at my home. So, let me skip then the acknowledgement part and start by explaining the components of the title of my talk, which you are now seeing on the screen. Terminologies. Mostly my examples will be about scientific terminologies, because those are the things I know best. Although the comments in general that I am going to make apply to terminologies in other fields. Indian languages, again, because of my experiences, my examples will mostly be from Bengali and maybe some from Hindi for the purpose of comparison. I am not very familiar with other languages, so I will better not talk about them, although again my comments apply to other languages. And three horizons is something that I will explain a little later into my talk. So, let us go to the next slide. What is a terminology? A terminology is a collection of terminological words or terms. And terms are words or phrases which have restricted use in a language on topics which do not concern everyone, which are used only when you talk about a specific topic. Now, these terminological words are created in the following ways. Number one, a single person working in a certain discipline, when he or she encounters a new object or a new idea which cries for a name, the person can assign a name. Number two, a committee created by the government or a university or some such organization to assess the terms that exist and modify them if needed, and suggest new terms wherever necessary. So, the question is, how do they do it? Well, when a person or a committee faces such a situation, in the context of Indian languages, of course, there are really the following options in the modern day world. Number one, choose a word from just common parlance. Number two, use Sanskrit words or words derived from Sanskrit. Number three, use English or words from other languages which enter through English. And number four, use hints from other modern Indian languages. Now, I will use a geographical metaphor in which The first option will be called the mainland, of which the other three are horizons. And this explains why I used the words three horizons in the title of my talk. So, my task would be to explore the importance of these different horizons. But before I get to that, I have to discuss the mainland. The mainland is the common parlance. Why shouldn't we take words from common parlance? This should be the most obvious way, or even the only way. Why do we even need to discuss other alternatives? Well, there are several reasons. Number one, names of some objects exist in common parlance, but names of ideas usually do not. For example, there might be a common word for iron ore, but definitely none for determinism. Number two, if you take a commonly spoken word as a terminological word, its meaning might be confused with the loose meanings that exist in common parlance. I will give examples later. Number three, very common words may not have the grammatical flexibility that is needed to define a terminological word. So, consider the following words: a verb for describing the happening of a process, for example, crystallize; a noun for the name of the process, crystallization; an adjective for something that has undergone the process, crystallized. Unless all these words can be derived from the same grammatical root in the common parlance, the connection between them will not be obvious. So, very rarely the mainland is suitable for terminological words, and we have to look out to the horizons. So, the first horizon, Sanskrit. Well, in terms of flexibility that I just mentioned, Sanskrit is excellent. It has almost infinite flexibility and very well defined rules for changing a verb to a noun, to an adjective, or an adjective to a verb, and so on. So, if one chooses to look up to Sanskrit for a term, what does he or she do? Well, there are several methods. Method 1, pick a familiar Sanskrit word. This method would be closest to the mainland coinages. I mean, after all, there are some Sanskrit words in our common parlance as well. But the question comes, if the word is familiar, then why would it need to be picked or coined? The answer is that even a familiar word used as a terminology will have to have a very special and precise meaning that the usual word might not have in the main body of the language. Example from English: stress and strain means roughly the same thing in ordinary language, but in physics they are very different things. Example from Sanskrit: Shakti and Kshamata are almost synonyms in Bengali, except in physics books. So, the words have to be given very specific meanings as terms, and no synonyms would be allowed. This is the task one needs to perform in order to establish a Sanskrit word as a terminological word. Now, before I move on, I would like to make one comment about my pronunciation of the Sanskrit words. I am giving examples of Sanskrit words as they are used in Bengali. In Bengali, they are not pronounced as they were pronounced in Sanskrit. So, what I will say is probably somewhere in between the Bengali pronunciation and the Sanskrit pronunciation, but I hope that it will still be understandable to people who do not know Bengali but are familiar with the Sanskrit words. And anyway, you have the aid of the written version on the screen. To come back to my point, method 2, you pick an unfamiliar Sanskrit word. Now, the basic idea here is that you look for words which were there in the Sanskrit vocabulary, but was not in frequent use in a modern language, and use it with a special terminological meaning close to the original Sanskrit meaning. For example, in the late 19th century, some Bengali authors suggested using Bayu to mean gas. Now, this created some problems. So, Ramendra Sundar Trivedi, a very influential author of that time, he suggested the little unfamiliar word anil for gas. But actually, meanwhile, the word gas itself became a household word because of gas lights on the streets. So, anil was not really used very much. Anyway, some other suggestions by the same person, salil for fluid, again not used, but should have been. There are some successful examples of such uncommon Sanskrit words being used, although not necessarily from science. Culture in Bengali was called Krishti in late 19th century or even in the early 20th century. There are many people who did not like the word, like Rabindranath Tagore, and he used to make jokes all over with this word. So there was a need for a new word, and then the linguist Suniti Kumar Chattopadhyay, who will be mentioned again later, he found that in Marathi people use the word Sanskriti. So that was the word taken. It's a Sanskrit word used in Marathi, and now it's a common word. For energy, the Hindi word, the common parlance word was takat, but it was translated as urja in Hindi in early 21st century. Just within the last 1 or 2 decades it has come in use. So these are the kind of things of using unfamiliar Sanskrit words. And then comes method 3, which is creating a new word. This is actually the most powerful method. And let us start with an example. See, Galileo argued that all speeds are relative. One cannot define or measure absolute speed. Albert Einstein used it as a postulate for a theory called the theory of relativity. Now, how would you translate relativity? In Bengali, and probably in some other Indian languages as well, the word is apekshikata. This word never existed in Sanskrit because the associated idea didn't exist. There was no need for the word, and yet it is a Sanskrit word. That's what I mean by creating a Sanskrit word. So why is it a Sanskrit word? Okay. So, the basic question is, how can you create a new word in Sanskrit which did not exist in Sanskrit, and how can they have a specific meaning? Okay, let's discuss the answer. The point is that the basic units of meaning are not necessarily words. In linguistics, they are called morphemes. It's best to explain the concept with an example. Suppose I take this word rudeness. It is one word, but it has two morphemes. One is rude. This in fact is an independent word as well, and it's a morpheme also. Such morphemes, which can be used as free words also, are called free morphemes. And then in the word rudeness, there is the other part, ness. It is an example of a bound morpheme, which conveys a meaning but cannot be used as a word. So, when I join it with a bona fide word, in this case an adjective, then it means the feel of that adjective. Now, one can use existing morphemes and existing rules of joining morphemes to create new words which did not exist earlier, and that's exactly what happened to apekshikata. Apeksha is a free morpheme, and with it you add ik, which had a very specific meaning in Sanskrit, and ta. Ta is a bound morpheme which converts an adjective to a noun, like ness in English. So, these are all Sanskrit morphemes. The word was not there, but the morphemes were all there, ready to be used. So, how does one join these morphemes to create or coin new words? Okay. We will assume that the word already exists in some other language, for example in English, let us say, and we want to translate it in some sense. It does not always have to be literal translation, as we will see later. So, what do we do? Option A, divide the word into morphemes. Find the closest approximation of each morpheme and join them together. An example, telescope. It contains two morphemes. Number one, tele, from Greek, means far. Far is translated in Bengali as dur. And in telescope, the other morpheme is skopos, again from Greek. It means vision. So, in Bengali, we say bikshan or bikhan. In Bengali pronunciation, it is bikhan. It is a non-colloquial word for vision, but together they made durbikhan. That is the word for telescope. Now, once created, the success of the word will be determined by whether the same translation of the two morphemes can be used in other words. For example, can you use the same translation of tele in telephone, television, telepathy, or scopos in spectroscopy, ophthalmoscopy, laparoscopy? I am not telling you exactly what happened in this case, but these are the questions that one has to think about. Now, there are some problems with using this method. One problem is that some of the morphemes may not have an easy equivalent. For example, in the word disproved, there is the morpheme dis, which essentially negates what comes later, but just a negative morpheme is not good enough, because disproved does not mean not proved. it means something else. So, you need some other solution. Another problem is that some morphemes may not have uniform usage in the source language. For example, look at this morpheme pathy. English made a complete mess of this morpheme. In myopathy, pathy means sickness. In homeopathy, pathy means a system, in fact a system for curing sicknesses. Telepathy, here pathy means connection. So, pathy means many different things, and the only reason why these words came into existence is the people who started using them probably did not know or did not care about how the word pathy or the morpheme pathy means. Another problem with morphemic translation is that for some words, morphemic translation would only uncover failed ideas. For example, consider hydrogen. Two morphemes, Greek, both Greek, huder and genes. Roughly it means something that creates water. I will explain what is the problem, but let us also see another word, oxygen. Here, if you go by the morphemic meaning, it means something that creates acids. But now we know that oxygen is also a constituent of water. So, why should only hydrogen be called something that creates water? Why not oxygen? And moreover, what is worse is that oxygen, the morphemic meaning is something which creates acid, although oxygen is not an essential constituent of all acids. In fact, the essential constituent is hydrogen. So, if you want to make a morphemic translation like udojan for something which creates water, or amlojan, something which creates acid, and use it for hydrogen and oxygen respectively, this will just create misleading names. This is not desirable, and in fact it should be avoided. So, at this point, let us summarize a little bit what we have said so far and also give some glimpses of what are the things going to come. We said that if you want to coin a new term, there are three methods: accept a familiar word, revive an unfamiliar word, or create a new word. Now, how do you create a new word? There is the possibility of making morphemic translation, which we have described, and then what we are going to describe are the two other possibilities. One is approximating the meaning, and number 3 is phonetic approximation. So, first, approximating the meaning. So, in this method, rather than analyzing the morphemes, one tries to understand the usage of the whole word and then tries to find a suitable word in the receiving language. For example, take a series of numbers like 1, 4, 7, 10, 13. As you see, at each step, the number increases by a fixed amount, in this case by 3. This kind of series are called arithmetic progressions. Why arithmetic? All numbers belong to arithmetic. There is really no good answer. In fact, if you take a series like 1, 4, 16, 64, where each number increases by a certain ratio compared to the previous number, in this case by 4, it is called a geometric progression. So, why geometry? No good answer. In the first kind, the difference between successive terms is constant, as I just said. In the second, the ratio is constant. In Bengali, the first kind is called samantar sreni. Samo antar. Antar is difference. Samo means equal. So, literally it means equal difference series. The second one is called Gunottar Shreni. Gun is multiplication, and so it's a series obtained by multiplication. So, these explains the definitions quite well. So, there is really no need to literally translate arithmetic progression or geometric progression. Similarly, disprove, a word which I discussed before, can be translated as khandan. This was used by the Nyaya logicians. Black hole can be andhakup. The last option in this context is where one tries to make a word in the receiving language that is phonetically similar to the original word, irrespective of the meaning. So, in the 19th century, some authors of Bengali preferred netrogen for nitrogen, acetylene for acetylene, and so on. I mean, it may not sound as crazy as it does if one recalls that this is the commonest method of absorbing words from other languages. When Bengali took the word apple from English, it is not pronounced apple, it is pronounced apel. Or table in English became tebil in Bengali, because joined consonants at the end of a word are discouraged in Bengali, almost non-existent. Now, it has successfully happened for some scientific terms as well. For example, Roentgen rays have become Ranjan Rashi. Rashi means rays, and Roentgen become Ranjan. Now, for words like table or apple, this is quite innocuous, because the transformed pronunciation did not have any meaning in Bengali. But if you want to translate nitrogen as netrogen, then there are potential problems, since the word suggests a meaning that is different from the intended one. Netro means eye and jan means person. So, eye person? Well, that has nothing to do with the gas that is the most dominant component of the air around us. So, that is the problem, and that problem has to be avoided. Now, we will come to the second horizon, which is the horizon of English. In fact, there are many people who think this is the only horizon that one should look at. In other words, they think that all terminological words should be borrowed directly from English by mere transliteration. And anyone who looks at any other alternative does it from mindless conservatism or cowardice. They think that people who do this promote parochialism, where internationalism should be the motto. So, anytime they encounter in an article a terminological word which is not derived from English, they complain to the author, "Oh, you have written so many difficult words. Yesterday when I was trying to read your article, I have lost 2 of my wicked teeth." Well, there is of course some exaggeration in that statement, but I think you get the general idea. Now, to the holders of this opinion, the gist of my comments are these. Mindless conservatism is of course bad, but so is foolish adventurism. And cowardice is bad, but so is violence in the name of strength. So, let us think the option carefully rather than blindly accepting that this is the best option. So, the first question that one encounters is the following. Which words are terminological words and which are not? If I give you the following sentence, if we increase the pressure on a solid substance, how will that affect the relation between its temperature and volume? Which of the words in this sentence are terminological words? Even in English. To understand the difficulty in answering this question, consider the names of various chemical elements. Radium, uranium, tungsten. Okay, they are definitely terminological words. Nobody would debate about that. These words are otherwise meaningless, and we should definitely use only the transliterated forms when doing any writing in Indian languages. Oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. The English names are bad. I have discussed the names of oxygen and hydrogen before. But anyway, we should still use them. Iron, gold, silver, these are also elements. Are these terminological words? Definitely not. So let us look at the case of iron, silver and gold in a little more detail. We might decide to use the words available for them in our own languages. For example, in Bengali, it would be loha, rupo and sona. In Hindi, it would be loha, chandi and sona. But the problem does not end there. What do you do for silver nitrate? Presumably, everyone will agree that the nitrate part should remain. Should then silver also remain in the names of compounds? Or should we make hybrid compounds? Hybrid compounds of words, I mean. The case of iron is even worse, because even in English, the names of iron compounds do not start with iron, they start with ferrous or ferric. In fact, English is not really international enough in this regard. The truly international names for elements are their chemical symbols. So then why shouldn't we use ferrum, argentum, aurum, which are close to the symbols Fe, Ag, Au? Now take another word, light. No one will claim that light is a scientific term. The common Bengali word is alo, a shortened form of the Sanskrit word alok. But we need to use the word in combination with other morphemes to describe physical properties of light. In that case, should we use light, as we propose to use silver in silver nitrate? Well, there are two problems if we decide to use the word light. Number one, the word light is used in Bangla even in common parlance, but in the related sense of source of light. For example, we say tube light. Now, will there be a conflict between the two meanings? Number two, in English terminology also, the word light is not always used to denote light. For example, photography, photosynthesis, photon. So, in order to appropriate light from English, should we have to appropriate the Greek stem photos as well? So, the basic question is it wise to import words where we already have words? And if we do, will it make our task of comprehension easier or more difficult? Suniti Kumar Chattopadhyay, the famous linguist, wrote, I am translating, celluloid, bakelite, paraffin, petrol, asbestos, these are words for which it is difficult to find a Bangla equivalent and we don't feel bad if we cannot. But if we do not find a phrase from Bangla root words to mean air raid, then it seems that we are admitting that our language is crippled. Of course, air raid is not a technical word, but in the same spirit, consider laws of motion or natural selection. All the words appearing in these phrases are ordinary words. Should we have to then use them in English when we talk about science? Now, at the morphemic level, the question is more poignant. Suppose, even for argument's sake, that we have decided to absorb the word reflection in our language. What will happen to reflected or reflectivity? Should we take them as well? Or treat reflection now as a root word and inflect it by the rules of our language using bound morphemes? Hardened English lovers will probably say, well, what's wrong with taking in all of them? Reflection, reflected, reflectivity, and maybe more. Here is what's wrong. The task of a language is to convey information. The relation between different words is conveyed by their morphemic structure. If you kill that structure, language becomes difficult to understand. And terminology constitutes a part of language, and the comment above applies to terminologies as well. So, suppose we take the word iron from English and write it using our alphabet. Now, a person encountering this word for the first time, of course, will have to understand its meaning. But then, there is no need for taking ionized. We have bound morphemes which can do the job. We can just say ionito. The more one uses known morphemes, it is easier to understand the words. Consider a native English speaker encountering the word alloy for the first time, and a native Hindi speaker encountering Mishra Dhatu. The first one has to learn the word, the second one needs no effort in understanding the concept. So, what I am saying can be more formally said if I classify different kinds of words in relation to their meaning. A word can be either a root word or a derived word in which there are multiple roots. Now, a derived word can have a meaning which is in the derivative sense. That would be the most usual thing to expect, but sometimes a derived word acquires a specialized meaning within the entire realm of the derivative meaning. And there are instances where a word deviates from its original meaning and acquires a meaning that is non-derivative. So, what I am saying is that if you have a root word or a derived word which has a non-derivative meaning, these words have to be learned. So, I am calling them unsolvable words. Whereas, if you have a derived word which is used in the derivative meaning or even in a specialized meaning, I am calling it solvable. So, the solvable words, even if they are new, they are easy to understand. The more solvable words in a terminology, the better it is for comprehension. If you take a word from English directly, you are adding a root word which cannot be easily inflected. Take energy, and you don't know what to do with energetic. But if one uses Shakti in Bengali, one can use Shaktiman for energetic. Consider oxygen, which we have taken, of course. But now what to do with oxidation? Oxidize, oxidized, oxidative. In Bengali, considering the difficulty, it was decided to cut the morphemic relation between oxygen and oxidation and call the latter word Jaron. No connection with oxygen in an obvious way. So one has to learn it. But once you learn it, then it automatically follows that oxidized will be Jarito, oxidative will be Jarondharmi. Now, if an English lover thinks that we should have taken the words derived from oxygen as well, let me ask whether the meanings of the derived words are easy even in English. So, I would say fill in the gaps. From oxygen, you have the word oxidize. From hydrogen, what is the corresponding word? Or from nitrogen? From oxygen, you can also have oxidative. What are the corresponding words from hydrogen or nitrogen? The point is, these morphemic changes are happening not with morphemes of English. Oxidative is a root word for all practical purposes, even to an English speaker. Jarondharmi is not so to a Bengali speaker. Once the Bengali speaker understands Jarondharmi is obvious. It need not be explained at all. Now, English, the problem is English has too many root words in its terminology. You remember the example I gave with alloy, which in Hindi was Mishra Dhatu. Here are some more examples. Division, one of the four basic things you do with arithmetic. Now, after the division, you get, what do you get? Quotient and remainder. In Bengali, division is bhag, but then quotient is bhagphal. Phal means result. And remainder is bhag shesh. Shesh means whatever is left over, or remainder you can say. Diameter, radius, the two words are not related. In Bengali, vash, vashardha, ardha means half. So, basically the words in Bengali are vash and half bash. Molecule is anu, atom is paromanu. I will come to these words in a little while. Circle, ellipse, parabola, three completely unrelated words. When one encounters these words, they have no idea that they are related in some sense, that they are all even curves on a plane. In Bengali, britto, upobritto, parabritto. Mass, speed. Mass in Bengali is bhar, speed is beg. Momentum, that is mass times speed. In Bengali, it is bhar beg. Let us analyze the words in English. Quotient is a root word. Remainder is not a root word, but it has a specialized derivative meaning. I mean, why can the result of subtraction be called remainder? Diameter may be called a derived word, but the morphemes are not very English. Atom is a root word in English. Of course, in Greek, it is the derived word tomos, but the morphemes are sparingly used even in English, and whenever they are only with heavyweight words. For example, you can say asymptomatic, but not agud or a band. Ellipse is a root word in English, so is parabola. So let me continue with the advantage of using derived words. Bacteria in English, in Bengali it's called jibanu. A Bengali reader immediately understands the word. An English reader has to learn it. Atom in Bengali, Paromanu. A Bengali reader understands that it is smaller than Anu. An English reader has to memorize it and often confuses whether an atom is a part of a molecule or a molecule is a part of the atom. It can be worse. Arthropod. The English word is incomprehensible. The Bengali word sandhipod. Sandhi means joint, pod means leg. It conveys the meaning clearly. Marsupial, Onko Garbho in Bengali. Onko means lap, Garbho means womb. Onko is not really the preferred colloquial word, but is understood by everyone. Cotyledon, Bij patro. Bij is seed, patro is leaf. I think no comment is needed for this. Velar in linguistics, a description of a type of consonant sound. Looking at the English word, nobody understands the meaning. The Bengali word is kantho. Kantho means throat. Now, very staunch English lovers might say that arthropod or cotyledon sounds perfectly easy to them. Their teeth are not troubled when they pronounce these words. Partly this is because we learn English from books. We think speed and velocity are on equal footing in English. We think backache, rheumatism and arthritis are interchangeable words. They are not to an English speaker. Words like, let's say, refraction or diffraction used in physics terminology are meaningless concoctions in English. So, there is hardly any point of just transliterating them in our language. And besides, why shouldn't we strive to do better than English in certain cases? I have already given examples of arithmetical progression where we have done better. Photosynthesis. In Bengali, it's called Shalok Sangsleshon. Alok is light, but there is a saw before that. Shalok means with light. Sangsleshon means synthesis. So, it is a synthesis done with the help of light. If you look at the English word, you don't know whether light has been used for the synthesis or light itself has been synthesized. Or consider the word interference. You learn this word in physics and then you have to learn coinages like constructive interference, which sound like oxymorons. In Bengali, Batichar is much better and it uses familiar morphemes. So, here I rest my case and go to the third horizon, other Indian languages. Of course, I can meaningfully talk about the relation between, say, Bengali and Hindi and not much more. Now, morphologically, Hindi is much stronger than Bengali. For example, the Hindi adjective bhala, from it you can make a noun, bhalai. The corresponding Bengali adjective bhalo cannot be inflected to a noun. In fact, if Bengali could have appropriated some bound morphemes from Hindi, it would have been good for the language. On the other hand, Sanskrit words were a minority in Hindi, unlike languages like Bengali or Marathi. Hindi experts should have looked at these horizons in their modern drive for Sanskritization. In the process, they have created Sanskrit words which are bogus words. For example, in order to mean something which can be obtained, they created the word upalabdha, whereas according to Sanskrit morphemes, it should have been upalabhya. Upalabdha in Sanskrit in fact means something which has been obtained. For nashta, they are now writing upahar in Indian Railways, which should have been upahar, a long a with the pa. In fact, there was no need for replacing Arabic and Persian words which became part of the Hindi language or of any other Indian languages. What Hindi should have done is that it should have taken hint from Bengali and Marathi in their drive for Sanskrit words. In a few cases, they produced better words than Bengali, like Mishra Dhatu, an example that I gave before. The Bengali word is Shankar Dhatu, where Shankar is a non-colloquial alternative of Mishra. But in most cases, Hindi produced disastrous results. Here are a few examples. Horizontal. The Hindi translation made is Kshaitij. Bengali, Anubhumik. The word bhumi is closer to colloquial than kshiti, and the ja in kshaitij, that morpheme is misplaced. The ja means something which is born out of there. In this case, it's not something which is created out of the earth. Background. Hindi, prishthabhumik. This just uses false morphemes. It's like translating sand and witch to find a word for sandwich. The Bengali word here often used is nepothyo, and it's used even outside science. Important. This is certainly not a typically scientific word, but in Hindi recently the word which has been coined to describe this meaning is mahattapurna. In Bengali, the word is guruttapurna. Gurutto means importance, mahatto means greatness. One should not confuse importance with greatness. If there is any confusion, one should just look at the political arena. But anyway, let me not talk about that. What I am saying is, in short, the interaction between different Indian languages has not been satisfactory. Besides, one has to remember that some languages which we usually call Indian languages are not exclusively Indian. So, Bengali terminologies, for example, should be standardized between experts of India as well as experts of Bangladesh. Hindi, Urdu terminologies should be standardized between experts of India as well as experts of Pakistan. And the same comment applies to Punjabi terminologies as well, although I really do not know the Punjabi language, but just from the demography of the language, I feel quite confident to make that comment. So, that is all I have to say. Thank you for your attention. I will leave in front of you the last slide of my presentation, where I have indicated the source of the material of this talk, an article in a literary journal, and later an article in a book of mine in Bengali. Thank you very much. Bye.